There are questions you're not supposed to ask your parents questions. They dodge. Questions they laugh off, questions they pretend they didn't hear. But nothing prepared me for the way my dad reacted when I finally asked him about the night in the photo. One single photo. One moment frozen in time. One detail that should have been harmless, except it didn't match the story he'd sworn was true for more than 2 decades. He always said he spent that night at home, taking care of me while my mom worked late. It was a simple memory, ordinary even, one I had no reason to question. Until I found the photo. A photo taken somewhere he claimed he wasn't, with people he claimed he didn't know. Doing something that made absolutely no sense. When I showed it to him, the color drained from his face. It was like watching a wall crack open. And when I finally asked him why he lied, he didn't deny it. He didn't explain it. He didn't even look at me. He just whispered, "You shouldn't have seen that," and walked away. Now I'm left wondering what else he's been hiding and why telling the truth scares him more than being caught. Families like to pretend their history is a clean, straight line. Mine was no different. My dad always said he wasn't perfect, but he was honest. I believed that for most of my life. I believed his stories, his timelines, his version of events. But the night I found that photo tucked inside an old box in the garage, an unmarked envelope filled with snapshots that didn't match anything he'd ever told me, that belief cracked open like thin ice under too much weight. People say photos don't lie, but sometimes it's the person looking at them who suddenly realizes the truth has been edited, rearranged, rewritten. When I showed him the picture, I expected confusion or nostalgia, anything but the fear that flashed across his eyes. And when I asked him why he lied, everything I thought I knew about him shifted. Before I explain what the photo showed, why it matters, and what happened after my dad walked out of the room, make sure you subscribe to the Conflict Corner. Here, every story comes from the moments families try to bury on the truths that refuse to stay hidden. I didn't find the photo on purpose. That's the part that still gets me. The part that makes my chest tighten whenever I think about how easily the truth could have stayed hidden. I was just cleaning the garage, trying to make room for a few storage bins after my mom asked, for the 100th time, if I could please deal with the mess before someone breaks a leg in there. The garage was a graveyard of forgotten objects, boxes filled with cables no one remembered owning, dusty Christmas ornaments, old tax papers, and things my parents swore they would use again someday, but never did. I was halfway through sorting a stack of random folders when I found a box without a label. Nothing unusual at first. My family had plenty of unlabeled chaos, but the box was heavier than the others, packed tight with envelopes, postcards, and a few old photo albums that looked older than me. I opened the first envelope expecting boring family Christmas photos or dad posing in front of the car he used to brag about. Instead, I pulled out a picture taken on a night I'd heard stories about my entire life. My 6th birthday, the birthday he said he stayed home with me while my mom worked a double shift. The birthday, he said, he made me macaroni and cheese and let me watch cartoons until I fell asleep on the couch. The birthday, he said, we didn't go anywhere because I had a cold. I believed all of it, every word. That night was woven into my childhood like a soft thread, but the photo didn't match any of it. It showed my dad standing under neon lights outside a bar I didn't recognize, dressed nicer than I'd ever seen him in any old picture. He wasn't alone. 2 men stood beside him, and one of them had his arms slung over my dad's shoulder like they were celebrating something. My dad was holding a drink in his hand, not a soda, not water, something dark, like whiskey. He was smiling a wide, confident smile I had never seen on him in real life, like he was someone else entirely. The timestamp on the back, written in faded blue ink, said it clearly. The date of my 6th birthday, the night he swore he never left the house. At first, I assumed it was a mistake, maybe a mislabeled envelope or a reused photo from another day. But the more I stared at it, the more undeniable it became. It was him. The same jacket he kept in the closet for years. The same haircut he always complained about. The same tired eyes, except in the picture, they weren't tired at all. They were alive in a way I had never seen. My stomach twisted as I pulled out more photos. 6 or 7 of them, all from that same night. My dad, laughing, drinking, leaning against a jukebox with his tie loosened. The 2 men beside him looked familiar, though I couldn't place them. One of them had a tattoo on his wrist I recognized from a story my mom once told one of my dad's old friends he supposedly hadn't seen since before I was born. So why were they together that night? Why wasn't he home like he always said? And why did he lie? I must have stared at those photos for so long that I didn't notice my mom walk into the garage. "You okay?" she asked casually, wiping her hands on a dish towel. I snapped out of my trance and quickly tucked the photos back into the envelope. "Yeah," I said, my voice sounding far less convincing than I hoped. She raised an eyebrow. "You look pale. Just dusty in here," I muttered. But the truth was settling heavily on me, refusing to be brushed aside. My mom didn't press. She was good at sensing when someone didn't want to talk. But as soon as she went back inside, I stayed frozen, staring at the box, at the envelope, at the truth I wasn't ready for. I didn't bring it up for 2 days. I carried the photos in my pocket like a weight, replaying every memory of my childhood that involved my dad. He wasn't a bad father, not in the traditional sense. He showed up, he worked hard, he provided, but he wasn't expressive either. He kept his feelings tucked away like receipts in old drawers. He was the type of man who answered emotional questions with practical solutions. The type who believed silence was better than arguments. The type who didn't lie at least. That's what I thought. So the night I finally asked him about the photo, I expected confusion, maybe embarrassment, maybe a simple explanation, something that made sense. But nothing prepared me for the look in his eyes when I said, "Dad, why did you lie about that night?" It was like watching a storm sweep across his face. First shock, then fear, then something deeper, something unreadable. He didn't ask which night. He knew, immediately. He knew exactly what I meant. And before I could show him the picture, before I could say another word, he whispered, "You shouldn't have seen that." The tone of his voice chilled me. Not angry, not defensive, terrified. He got up from his chair slowly, like his body suddenly felt heavier. He didn't look at me. He didn't ask to see the photo. He didn't try to talk his way out of it. He just walked toward the hallway with a strange, distant expression. Like he'd been waiting 20 years for this moment to catch up to him. Something inside me cracked. "Dad," I called, my voice shaking. "What happened that night?" He stopped but didn't turn around. "Let it go," he said quietly. "Please." That word "please" hit me like a punch. My father never begged, never pleaded, never seemed afraid, but he was afraid now. Afraid of the truth. Afraid of what I found. Afraid of himself. When he closed the bedroom door, I was left standing in the living room, still holding the envelope like a detonator. I didn't sleep that night. I kept replaying his reaction, not what he said, but what he didn't say. If it were harmless, he would have explained. If it were innocent, he would have laughed it off. If it were a misunderstanding, he would have asked to see the photo. But he didn't. He walked away. And as the hours dragged on, a thought began forming in the back of my mind. A thought I didn't want to consider. A thought that made my skin crawl. What if my father wasn't the man I thought he was? What if that night, the night he insisted he spent taking care of me, was the night something else happened? Something he'd spent decades trying to bury. The next morning, he acted like nothing happened. He drank his coffee, read the newspaper, and talked about mundane things like the weather and a sale happening at the hardware store. But he didn't meet my eyes. Not once. And that silence between us was louder than any argument we could have had. The photo wasn't just a lie. It was the key to something he never wanted me to unlock. And now that I had found it, I wasn't sure I could ever put it back. For the rest of that week, my dad moved through the house like a man carrying a secret he didn't have the strength to protect anymore. He wasn't avoiding me exactly, but he wasn't present either. He spoke less, slept less, and seemed more distracted than I'd ever seen him. Every time I walked into a room, he went quiet, and when our eyes met briefly, he looked away like the truth was sitting right behind me, watching him. I kept the envelope hidden in my room, tucked inside a drawer like contraband. Part of me wanted to confront him again, demand answers, hold the photo in his face until he broke. But another part of me, the part that had grown up afraid of disappointing him, hesitated. I didn't want to hurt him, even when his lie hurt me. That conflict sat on my chest day after day. My mom sensed something was wrong. She wasn't oblivious. She noticed the way my dad kept touching his forehead, like he had a headache he couldn't shake. Or how I looked at him too long, waiting for him to say something, anything that made sense. She asked me twice what was going on, and both times I said, nothing, because I didn't want to open a door I couldn't control. But the photo haunted me. Not just the image itself, but the idea behind it. What could possibly make him rewrite an entire night of our lives? What was so impossible to admit that he'd rather build a false memory and defend it for more than 2 decades? I thought maybe the answer would come on its own, that he'd sit me down and tell me the truth in a moment of clarity. But that moment never came, and the silence stretched until it felt suffocating. On Friday evening, I heard him talking in the living room. Not loud, my dad was never loud, but with an intensity that made me stop in the hallway. He was on the phone. I don't know how he found it, he whispered harshly. I thought everything was gone. Yes, that night. Yes, the photo. My heart slammed against my ribs. I knew he was talking about me, about the envelope, about the lie he insisted I let go. If he asks again, what am I supposed to say? He continued. A long silence followed, and then he spoke again. Lower this time. I can't tell him that. I can't. My skin prickled. He wasn't just hiding a mistake, he was hiding something bigger. Something he couldn't even say out loud. I stayed still as a shadow until I heard him hang up. I didn't want him to know I was listening, but I also knew I couldn't wait any longer. We couldn't live in the same house with a secret breathing between us like a third person. After dinner, another painfully quiet meal where he barely ate, I asked him if we could take a walk. He looked startled, almost defensive, but he nodded. We walked down the street, under the dim glow of streetlights, the kind of suburban quiet that makes every emotion louder. He shoved his hands in his jacket pockets and kept his gaze on the sidewalk. I waited a few minutes before speaking. Dad, I said softly, I heard you on the phone. He stopped walking. His shoulders tightened. How much did you hear? Enough, I said. Enough to know this isn't just about being out with friends. This isn't just a small lie. There's something bigger. He stayed frozen, staring ahead like he could outrun the conversation if he refused to turn around. I don't want to fight, I said gently. I just want to understand. He finally turned toward me, and the look in his eyes made my stomach flip. It wasn't anger or annoyance, it was resignation. Like he had known this moment was coming since the day the photo was taken. You don't understand what you're asking, he said. You think you do, but you don't. Then help me understand, I pleaded. I'm not a kid anymore. You can tell me the truth. He shook his head slowly. Some truths don't help. Some truths only hurt. Lies hurt too, I said. This one already has. He exhaled shakily, the sound of someone choosing between two impossible paths. That night, I wasn't supposed to be there, he said. I felt my pulse spike. Where? At that bar. Then why were you? He hesitated, jaw tightening like he was holding something back. I was meeting someone, he said. Someone I wasn't supposed to meet. At first, the implication didn't register, but then it hit me all at once. My heart dropped into my stomach. Are you saying? The words stuck in my throat. Dad, were you cheating on Mom? His eyes snapped to mine, horrified. No, he said firmly. No, it wasn't that. I swear to you, it wasn't that. Relief washed through me, but only for a second. Because, if it wasn't an affair, then what was it? Then who were you meeting? I asked. The silence that followed felt like the world had paused. He looked away, swallowing hard. Your uncle, he said finally. For a moment I didn't understand. Uncle Mark. But he moved out of state before I was born. My dad shook his head slowly. Mark didn't move. He disappeared. The streetlight above us flickered. My breath caught. What do you mean, disappeared? He closed his eyes. Your uncle got involved with people he shouldn't have. Dangerous people. He owed money. Made bad decisions. And he came to me that night, desperate, scared, asking for help. A chill crawled down my spine. And you lied about it because your mother didn't want him in our lives anymore? He said. She wanted to protect you. And she wasn't wrong. But I couldn't just abandon him. He was my little brother. The world felt like it tilted under my feet. So, you went to meet him behind Mom's back? Yes, he whispered. And it went badly. Worse than I expected. I stared at him, trying to fit the pieces into a picture that made sense. What happened? He rubbed his forehead again, the same gesture I'd seen all week. There was a fight, not just words. Those men he owed money to were there. They wanted him to pay, and he didn't have it. Things escalated fast. He paused, his voice trembling. And I got hurt. Hurt. How? His eyes glistened, reflecting the dim light. I ended up in the hospital that night. The world went still. But you said, I know what I said, he interrupted softly. Your mother didn't want you to know. You were just a kid. She said you'd panic, that you'd have nightmares. So she made me promise to protect you, to protect our family, that we'd tell you I was home with you. That the night was uneventful, that nothing happened. But why keep lying for so long? His voice cracked. Because your uncle never came back. A cold, sickening silence settled between us. "Dad," I whispered, "is he dead?" My father didn't speak. He didn't need to. The truth was in the way his shoulders sagged, in the grief etched into lines on his face I had never noticed before. "They never found him," he said, and I never forgave myself. Everything inside me, twisted pain, fear, anger, compassion, all tangled in a knot I couldn't untangle. The photo wasn't about betrayal. It wasn't about cheating. It wasn't even about lying. Not really. It was about trauma, about survival, about a promise made in fear that grew into a secret too heavy to carry but too dangerous to release. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to feel. All I knew was that the man I thought was simply distant or emotionally closed off was someone who had been carrying a nightmare alone for more than 2 decades. When he finally met my gaze again, his eyes were wet. "I wasn't lying to hurt you," he whispered. "I was lying to protect you from a story no child should have to hear." The truth hit me all at once. The lie wasn't the betrayal. The burden was. For a long moment, neither of us moved. My dad stood there under the streetlight like a man frozen between 2 versions of himself, the father I thought I knew and the one who carried the weight of a night that had never truly ended. The revelation sat heavy between us. Not loud or dramatic, but quiet and devastating. Like the slow collapse of something that had been weakening for years. I didn't know where to place my emotions. The shock was still fresh, mixing with disbelief, sadness, and something I didn't expect: empathy. A part of me understood, even before I wanted to. "Why didn't you tell me?" I finally asked, my voice low, steady only because I forced it to be. "Why didn't you ever tell me what really happened?" He looked down at the pavement, the light catching in the lines around his eyes, lines that suddenly seemed deeper than I remembered. "Because once you tell a story like that," he said softly, "you can't take it back. And I didn't want your childhood shaped by the worst night of my life." "But I'm not a child anymore," I said, the frustration bubbling up. "I can handle the truth." He shook his head. "You say that now? But back then, you were so small, so trusting. I couldn't bring something that dark into your world. I couldn't let you look at me differently. But I do look at you differently," I said. "Now I have to." He closed his eyes as if the words physically struck him. "I know," he whispered. And that's what I always feared. We walked again, slowly, as if our bodies needed movement to process everything in our minds. The cool evening breeze was the only sound for several minutes. "Dad," I said carefully, "what happened after you left the hospital?" He sighed heavily, the kind of sigh that belongs to someone who has rehearsed the story in his mind for years but never spoken it out loud. "Your mother picked me up," he said. "I told her everything. She was furious at your uncle, terrified for me, and horrified at the danger he brought into our lives. She didn't want any part of it to reach you. She said you deserved better than to grow up with that kind of fear. So, she made you promise to lie?" He hesitated. "She made me promise to protect you. The lie came later." We walked past the mailbox at the corner of the street. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, loud and rhythmic, as if my body was trying to match the pace of my mind. "What about Uncle Mark?" I asked. "Did you look for him?" "Of course I did," he said, a rawness in his voice. "I spent months looking. I filed missing person reports. I talked to everyone he knew. I went back to that bar more times than I could count, and no one saw him." My dad shook his head, his jaw tight. He vanished completely. Those men he owed money to, they weren't the kind of people who let debts slide, and they definitely weren't the kind of people who cared about consequences. The meaning settled like ice in my chest. "So, you think they..." My dad swallowed hard. "I think whatever happened that night or soon after. And I think I was lucky to walk away." I stopped walking. "Lucky? Dad, you ended up in the hospital, and I lived," he said. "Mark didn't." The honesty in his voice was brutal. Honest in a way I had never experienced from him before. Honest in a way that comes only from someone who has spent decades carrying a truth alone. "Why hide the photo?" I asked. "Why keep it if it hurts so much?" He sighed again, "Because it was the last time I saw him. The last proof that he existed beyond the trouble he was in. I kept it because destroying it felt like admitting he was gone, but pretending that night never happened." He nodded slowly. "Pretending was easier than explaining. And your mother insisted. She thought the truth would poison your childhood. She thought you would grow up scared, looking over your shoulder, wondering if those men would ever show up again. She thought it would change how you saw your own home. But lying changed it too," I said. "Just in a different way." He looked at me with a mixture of guilt and heartbreak I didn't know how to interpret. "I know," he said, and I'm sorry. I let the words settle. They didn't fix anything, but they mattered. More than I expected. Why did you react like that when I showed you the photo? I asked. You looked terrified. He rubbed the back of his neck. Because I didn't think you would ever find it. I thought the box was gone. Your mother told me she threw away anything connected to that night. She must have missed one envelope, I said quietly. He nodded. Just one, but one was enough. We turned back toward the house, the street darker now as the night settled in. Motion sensor lights flickered on as we walked up the driveway, casting long shadows that stretched across the pavement. Dad, I said before he opened the front door. Why did you say you shouldn't have seen that? Why not just explain right away? He paused, his hand resting on the doorknob. Because I didn't want the burden I carried to become your burden. I didn't want the worst night of my life to become a chapter in yours, but it already is, I said softly. Now it is. But it wasn't before. He opened the door and stepped aside so I could enter first. Inside, everything looked the same now. Framed pictures on the wall, the old couch, the smell of laundry detergent mixed with whatever candle my mom burned that week. But something was different. The house felt lighter. Like the truth, heavy as it was, had created space where the lie used to sit like a cinder block. My dad closed the door behind us and leaned against it. Not dramatically, just tired. I'm sorry I hurt you, he said again, voice rough. And I'm sorry I wasn't honest with you sooner. I wasn't trying to deceive you. I was trying to protect you, maybe in the wrong way, but with the right intention. I nodded, my throat tight. I believe you. He exhaled like he'd been holding that breath for 20 years. What happens now? I asked. He gave a small, sad smile. Now we try to be honest. Even when it's hard. Even when it hurts. That night, I lay in bed with the envelope beside me, sealed again, but impossible to forget. For the first time, I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel betrayed. I felt older. Like the truth had changed the shape of who I was, not just who my father was. And somewhere in that heaviness, there was clarity. The photo didn't ruin my family. It finally revealed the cracks we'd painted over for years. And now that I knew the truth, I couldn't go back to pretending everything was simple. Because it wasn't. It never had been. But at least now, we were finally done pretending. The morning after my dad told me the truth, the house felt different in a way I couldn't fully explain. Quieter. Yes, but not the uncomfortable silence we'd been drowning in before. This silence felt like the air after a storm. Heavy, humid, yet strangely cleansing. I woke up earlier than usual, unable to sleep with everything swirling in my head. My father was already at the kitchen table, sipping coffee. His shoulders slumped in a way that made him look smaller, not physically, but emotionally. Like releasing the truth had taken a tangible piece of weight off him, but left him drained in the process. He didn't look up when I walked in, but his voice was steady when he said, "Coffee's still warm if you want some." It was such a normal sentence. Such a routine tone, that for a moment I wondered if he expected us to just continue like nothing monumental had happened. But when I sat across from him, he lifted his eyes and there was no pretending. Not anymore. "How are you?" he asked quietly. Not the casual kind of "how are you" that parents toss out without expecting a real answer. This was different. This was him asking as a man who owed me the space to react. "I don't know," I admitted. "I'm still processing." He nodded, taking the words in like he understood exactly what processing felt like after 20-something years of carrying a truth alone. "If you want to talk more about last night," he said, "I'm ready." I wasn't ready. Not completely. But I had questions, ones that had grown sharper in the hours between dusk and dawn. "Dad," I said, "why did you stop looking for him?" "For Uncle Mark," his face tightened. "I never stopped," he said. I had to stop asking questions because of the people involved, but I never stopped hoping, never stopped waiting. Waiting for what? He stared into his cup like the coffee could give him back all the years he'd lost. For a call, a letter, a sign he was okay, but nothing ever came. "Not once," he said. His voice broke slightly at the edges. "Not once in more than 20 years. Something inside me hurt at that. A quiet, unexpected pain. I had never even known Uncle Mark. He was a ghost in our family, stories mentioned rarely, in vague fragments, with a kind of grief my parents never named. Now I understood why. I stirred my coffee even though I didn't put sugar in it. I just needed something to do with my hands. "Why didn't Mom ever tell me?" I asked. She must have known everything. My dad leaned back, letting out a tired breath. "Your mother loves you more than anything. She thought she was protecting you from fear, from danger, from growing up with the knowledge that someone in your family had disappeared because of something dark, and you agreed. I did, he admitted, because I didn't want you to look at me like I'd failed. That sentence sat between us, raw enough to sting. Dad, I said slowly, I don't think you failed. He blinked hard, like he didn't expect to hear that. I made choices that night, he said. Choices that haunted our family, choices that shaped your mother's fears, choices that forced us into secrecy, but you were trying to help your brother, I said. How is that failure? He rubbed his face with both hands. Because I couldn't save him? The silence following that was heavy, weighted with decades of guilt and grief and the kind of regret that eats at a person slowly, day after day. I didn't know how to comfort him. I didn't know if comfort was even possible, but I knew he needed to hear something honest. You were injured, I said. You were outnumbered, and you still tried. That's not weakness. He let out a shaky laugh. It doesn't feel noble when you're the only one who survived. That hit harder than anything else so far. Survived. That's how he saw it. Not made it through, not got lucky. Survived. The weight of that word changed everything. Later that afternoon, my mom came home early. She took one look at the two of us sitting quietly in the living room and froze. You told him, she said immediately. My dad didn't flinch. He deserved to know. My mom closed her eyes, pressing her fingers against her temples. I knew this would happen someday, she whispered. I knew it. You knew what? I asked. That the past never stays buried, she said. Her voice wasn't angry. It was tired, sad, resigned. I didn't want you dragged into this. Dragged, I repeated. Mom, I found the photo. I asked a question. I wasn't dragged. I walked right into it. She looked at me, then really looked. Her eyes softened. I'm sorry, she said, for all of it. For the lies. For thinking you couldn't handle the truth. For letting your father carry so much alone. My dad touched her arm gently. We both carried it, he said. She nodded, tears welling up but not falling. I wanted you to grow up without fear, she said to me. Without knowing the family had connections to something dangerous, I wanted your father to be your hero, not someone you pitied. I don't pity him, I said immediately. I see him. That's different. My mom let out a breath she'd been holding for years. So what now? She asked. Now, I said, we stop lying. No more secrets. No more pretending. My father nodded. Agreed. My mother hesitated. But what about Mark? What about his story? What if digging into this brings danger back? Mom, I said, it's been more than 20 years. If danger was coming, it would have come already. But even as I said it, I wasn't entirely sure. And neither of them looked convinced. That night, after they'd gone to bed, I sat alone with the envelope again. I spread the photos across my desk, studying every detail, every shadow, every face. I wasn't looking for nostalgia. I was looking for answers. That was when I noticed something I had missed the first dozen times. I looked something small but unmistakable. In one of the photos, behind the men, partially obscured by neon glare, stood a sign. A street sign. And just barely visible under it, a second sign. A business name. It wasn't clear, but it was readable enough. Enough to give me a direction. Enough to make my heart thump with a mix of fear and curiosity. I snapped a picture of the photo with my phone. Then another. I zoomed in, adjusting the angle. The name became clearer. I stared at it for a long time. Was it a clue? A coincidence? A dead end? Or something deeper, something that might explain what really happened the night my uncle disappeared and my father nearly died? One thing was certain. The lie wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning. And now that I had opened it, I couldn't close it again. Not without knowing everything. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, the street sign from the photo flashed in my mind like a signal I had ignored for too long. It wasn't just a blurry detail anymore. It felt like a direction, a breadcrumb left behind by a past that refused to stay buried. The name on the sign, barely visible through neon glare, belonged to a small bar on the outskirts of town. One I had never been to, one my father never mentioned. One that looked like the kind of place where secrets clung to the walls like cigarette smoke. By sunrise, I knew I had to go. Not because I didn't believe my father, I did. But believing him wasn't the same as understanding the full truth. And something inside, me, curiosity, fear, duty, maybe all of them pushed me to finish what I had accidentally started. At breakfast, my dad noticed my silence. He didn't ask anything, but I could feel him watching me like he already knew I was planning something. My mom moved around the kitchen like she was trying too hard to pretend nothing had changed, but everything had, and pretending wouldn't fix any of it. After a few minutes of tense quiet, I stood up and grabbed my keys. "I'm going out," I said. "Where?" my mom asked, even though she already seemed afraid of the answer. "Just out," I replied, which wasn't an answer at all. My dad set down his coffee mug. "You're going to the bar?" It wasn't a question. I froze. "Dad, it's not safe," he said. "Not back then, not now. It's been more than 20 years, I said. "Whoever was involved back then is long gone. You don't know that." His voice cracked slightly, the fear in it unmistakable. That fear wasn't for himself. It was for me. But I couldn't let fear keep me from the truth. Not his fear, not mine. "Dad," I said softly, "I just need answers. Real ones. Not guesses. Not half-truths. I need to know what happened." He stared at the table for a long moment, then nodded once. Not in approval, more like acceptance. "If you go," he said quietly, "don't go alone. I'll be fine." "Don't," he repeated, sharper this time. "Promise me you won't go alone." For a moment, I considered lying, but that would just repeat the same cycle we were finally breaking. "Okay," I said, "I won't." But I also didn't tell him who I planned to bring because the person I had in mind wasn't family. It was my friend Lucas, someone who didn't know the whole story but knew enough to understand when something mattered. When I texted him, he responded immediately, "I'm in. Pick me up." He didn't ask why, which was exactly why I asked him. The drive to the bar felt longer than it actually was. The farther we got from town, the older everything Luck trusted: fences, cracked pavement, abandoned storefronts with faded signs. It felt like driving into a memory that didn't belong to me. When we finally reached the bar, it looked even smaller than in the photo. Same neon sign, same brick exterior, same aura of being stuck in another decade. A ghost of the night my father tried so hard to erase. Lucas whistled low. "This is the place." "Yeah, creepy," he said, trying to lighten the mood. It didn't work. We walked inside and the smell hit first. Stale beer, old wood, and something like history soaked into the walls. A few men sat at the bar, hunched over drinks even though it wasn't noon yet. A pool table clacked in the corner, and behind the counter stood a man in his 60s, with tired eyes and a face that had settled into permanent suspicion. He looked at us like we didn't belong there, and he was right. "You boys lost?" he asked. "No," I said. "I'm looking for someone, or information." His expression hardened. "We don't do information here." I reached into my jacket and pulled out the photo, sliding it across the bar. For a second, he didn't touch it, but his eyes widened just barely when he saw it. "That was enough." "That was a long time ago," he said. "I know. Why are you digging into things that ain't your business?" "Because one of those men is my father," I said, "and one of them is my uncle, the one who disappeared." The bartender froze completely. He picked up the photo, studied it more carefully this time, then looked at me again, really looked. "You're his kid, my father's." "Yes. And the other one?" "My uncle," I finished. "Mark?" The bartender set the picture down slowly, like it was something dangerous. "Did anyone ever tell you what happened that night?" "My dad told me part of it," I said. "I want the rest." He let out a humorless laugh. "The rest. The rest ain't pretty. I still need to hear it." The bartender wiped his hands on a towel, thinking for a long moment. "Your uncle was in deep trouble. People around here knew it, and the men he owed. They weren't patient." My chest tightened. "My dad said there was a fight." "Fight," the bartender repeated. "Son, that was no fight. That was an ambush." My breath caught. "Ambush. Your dad wasn't supposed to walk out of here alive. Neither was your uncle." The room felt colder. Lucas shifted beside me, suddenly alert. "But my dad did walk out," I said. "He was hurt, but he survived." The bartender nodded. "Because your uncle stepped in front of him." The words hit harder than anything my father had told me. "What do you mean? Stepped in front?" "He took the hit meant for your father. And then he told your dad to run. Run, run, and never come back," the bartender said. "Your uncle knew he wasn't getting out, but he made sure your father would." I felt the air leave my lungs. Everything around me blurred for a second. The bottles behind the bar, the low murmur of conversation, the neon light flickering by the door. "Did he die here?" I asked quietly. The bartender hesitated. "I don't know where he died, but he didn't leave this place on his own 2 feet." My voice shook when I spoke again. "Did my dad know?" "He knew your brother saved him," the bartender said. "He didn't see what happened after. He couldn't. If he stayed, he'd be dead too." Lucas put a steady hand on my shoulder. I didn't pull away. Why didn't anyone ever report it? I asked. Why didn't anyone say anything? The bartender snorted. Report it to who? The cops. They were scared of the same men. Everyone was. I swallowed hard, so my dad, he wasn't just protecting me. He was protecting the story of how he lived. And the story of how his brother died, the bartender added. Some things hurt too much to say out loud. I nodded slowly, the full weight of that truth settling into my bones. The lie my father told wasn't about deceit. It was about grief too heavy to carry and too dangerous to expose. Before we left, the bartender slid the photo back to me. Your uncle was a good man, he said quietly. Broken, but good. He died trying to save someone he loved. That should count for something. It counted for everything. On the drive home, neither Lucas nor I spoke. There was nothing to say. The truth wasn't a clean answer. It was a wound that never healed right. When I walked into the house, my father was sitting at the table again. He looked up, and our eyes met. He knew immediately where I'd been, what I'd learned. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. I sat down across from him, the envelope between us. For the first time, he didn't look afraid of it. Dad, I said softly, I know what happened. All of it. His eyes filled slowly, painfully. I never wanted you to carry that. I'm not carrying it alone, I said. Not anymore. Something broke in his expression. Not in a bad way, but in the way someone breaks when they realize they don't have to keep suffering in silence. He nodded, wiping his eyes. Thank you, he whispered. And for the first time in my life, I saw him clearly, not as the father who lied, but as the man who survived a night that took everything from him. And now, finally, we could start telling the truth together.